You can make just as nice an image with a very cheap lens as you can with a very expensive lens. Always remember, it's the photographer that makes the shot, not the equipment. Well, hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again and welcome to another episode. Well, there's no doubt that vintage lens prices have increased quite considerably over the past 2 to 3 years, and some are now quite expensive, but there are a number of vintage lenses, very high quality optics that remain very cheap, and today we're going to look at some of those. And the first group of lenses we're going to look at are the Tessars. Now, the Tessar design, that refers to an optical formula within the lens. The Tessar design is a very old design, goes back to, gosh, I think the 1890s, something like that. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But it is an old design and it's a really nice lens. It makes a really nice lens. It's inherently sharp with good contrast and nice background blur. It's not easy to make a Tessar that opens wider than f2.8, so that does tend to be the maximum aperture for most of these lenses, but many of them are really nice and we're going to have a look at some now. So we can look at this lens to begin with. This is a very commonly available lens. It's a Tessar design and these were made in the millions and millions and millions, such that they are very cheap today. A good example is this one. This is the Industar 61. This is a former Soviet lens made in the Ukraine, as I understand it, and it's a really nice lens. It's very sharp, it's got some nice background blur, it's got beautiful pastel soft colours, and it's actually a lens that I've used quite a lot and I really like it. This was my only lens when I was learning photography and I shot the flipping heck out of it. I've shot it a lot on digital where it gives some really nice results, and I've also shot it a lot on film too. It's a rangefinder lens with an an L, that is Leica 39mm mount. It's got the L39 mount. The M39 is different, that's an SLR mount. But this is a rangefinder lens and it's a very nice little cheap lens. And there are lots of other former Soviet Tessars as well. Here is the Industar 50. This is perhaps one of the world's ugliest lenses, but it's a very good optic. Its maximum aperture is f3.5, unlike the 61, which is 2.8. But it's very sharp, even sharper than the Industar 61, and it's a really great lens. You can also buy it in collapsible body, with a collapsible body. This is the rigid body, and it does look rather better with the collapsible body, but it's also quite a bit more expensive. Both of these lenses can be found for around £20, sometimes up to £40, but more usually 20 odd pounds, unless if you're patient. And these are both great lenses. I could also point to other Soviet lenses of the Tessar design, the Industar 22, a collapsible lens that's sitting on my old Leica here. And this is a really nice lens. This again is an f3.5, but that's fine. It's a rangefinder lens, so its minimum focus distance is 3 feet or 1 meter, but that again is absolutely fine. These lenses are all very nice lenses when used within their limits. We can't try and ask a lens to do more than it can do, but when used within their limits, they are excellent optics. So f3.5 for the Industar 50 and the 22, f2.8 for the Industar 61. Now those are all rangefinder lenses, but there are SLR lenses in Tessar design. The most common one that I know of anyway is this one, the Carl Zeiss Jena Tessar f2.8 50mm. These come with an M42 mount, so very, very easy to mount if you've got an M42 camera, film camera, or an M42 adapter for your digital camera. A very, very sharp lens. It focuses down to probably about 30 centimeters. It's marked at 35, but it goes a little bit past that, so you'll probably get down to about 30 centimeters or 1 foot. f2.8 maximum aperture means it doesn't give perhaps as much blur as a lens that opens wider, but because it will shoot so close, you can get loads of blur out of this lens if you stay close to your subject. And even if you pull back a bit, still keep the aperture open, it will still give you blur up to about, I don't know, 5 to 6 feet or thereabouts. And when it comes to it, how much blur do you really need? So the Tessar design offers loads and loads of opportunities for very cheap vintage lenses. Carl Zeiss Jena Tessar is one of the cheapest, as is the Industar 61, as is the Industar 50, but any of the Tessars will give you a nice cheap vintage lens experience, and these ones can be found from around about £20, so very, very accessible. And you know, you can buy these, experiment with them, sell them on if you don't like them, keep them if you do like them. They're a very, very easy, cheap way into vintage lens ownership and shooting. The former Soviet lenses that were made in the old Soviet Union by their photographic industry, those lenses are really cheap as well. We've touched upon some already, but we can also add to that those lenses we've looked at. We can also add to the Jupiter 8. The Jupiter lenses are generally very cheap, with the exception of the Jupiter 3. That one's an f1.5 50mm. That does tend to be rather expensive, but the Jupiter 8 f2 50mm is lovely and cheap. You'll find one of these for 20 to 40 pounds. Probably the best way to buy them is on a faulty Zorki camera. Very often Zorki 4s and 4Ks that don't work anymore will have one of these lenses on the front, and they're often cheaper than just buying the lens itself, but you can get many bargains just looking at the lens itself as well. It's a rangefinder lens. It's a direct copy of the Zeiss Sonar from the 1930s, so you'll get a really lovely 1930s image or type image out of it. The Jupiter 11 is a 135mm f4 lens. This is a lovely lens if you want to go long. These are very cheap. They were very, very cheap for many years. Now they've escalated in price to being merely very cheap. And by that, I mean you'll find one again for between 20 to 40 pounds. It's a rangefinder lens. f4 maximum aperture, but that doesn't matter too much because you've got plenty of, it's a very long lens, so it'll give you plenty of blur. And the minimum focus distance is 2.5 meters. That is a little long, but it doesn't really matter because this is a long lens anyway, and that 2.5 meter minimum focus distance will take you very close to your subject, or at least most subjects. Other former Soviet lenses, V-twin. Other former Soviet lenses include the Helios 44. This is a 44-3, a slightly later one, but there were loads of these made, and you'll find one with patience for around 30 to 50 pounds or something like that. They're slightly more expensive, but this is an iconic lens, and it has some very nice optical properties, including giving lots of swirl in the background blur. A copy of the 1930s Zeiss Biotar. Also from the former Soviet countries, or rather from East Germany, which was not quite, as I understand it, not an actual Soviet state, but was closely allied to the Eastern Bloc at that time. And this is the Maya Optic Gaulet's Oreston f1.8 50mm. This became the Praktica f1.8 50mm. It's exactly the same lens. You can buy an M42 or exact amount. This one's an exact amount. And these can be found again for between 30 and 40 pounds or thereabouts. So there are lots of former Soviet lenses under the Praktica brand, the Helios brand, the Jupiter brand, and also the Industar brand. Lots and lots of former Soviet lenses to keep you shooting, and most of them are pretty cheap. Don't discount third-party lenses, lenses from manufacturers like Vivitar, Chinon, Cosina, Miranda, lenses that were made by aftermarket companies without the big name on them. For example, Nikon, Canon, Olympus. They tend to be pretty cheap, and I've bought some really nice ones recently. The Hanimex f2.8 135 is a really nice lens that absolutely astonished me. This is one of the nicest 135s I've shot. I can also recommend the Vivitar f2.8 135. That's a really nice lens as well, very sharp with some nice background blur. So 135s, you know, there are as many third-party 135s as you like. Some are not that great, but many are really nice lenses. I can recommend the, as I say, the Hanimex, the Vivitar, also the Helios 135 f2.8 is a very nice lens. What else do we have? I recently bought this really nice Vivitar 28mm f2, and that cost me £15. And that is a really nice lens that focuses down to 30 centimeters, so it goes very close. It's also got a wide aperture, so this is a 28mm lens that you can make some background blur with if you stay close to your subject. That's a really nice lens. It's all metal, it's quite heavy, and there's some quality gone into its physical manufacture, and the optics are great as well. The Miranda lenses are really nice too. I really like Miranda lenses. These were really cheap lenses. I'm not quite sure who made these lenses, but it was one of the Japanese companies who specialized in lens manufacture at the time. Tokina was one of them. I know Cosina made a certain amount of third-party lenses, and there were other manufacturers as well, but I'm not entirely sure who made these. But I am sure that they're really nice lenses. Every one of the Miranda lenses I've tried has been really nice. There's the zoom lens, there's this one, the, what's this one? 24mm f2.8 is very nice. The 50mm f2 is really nice. And the longer lenses with the Miranda name are really nice as well. So some third-party lenses, lots of third-party lenses available that will give you really nice vintage images for not much cash. And finally, the final group of lenses I'd like to talk about are kit lenses. Lenses that were supplied as standard with a new camera, usually a 50mm f2 or f1.8. Those are the ones we need to be looking at. They tend not to be particularly expensive these days, even with a big name on the front. I've got the Pentax 55mm f2 here. There was also an f1.8, but they are the same lens. And this is a really nice little lens. It gives very nice background blur. It's sharp from wide open, and like all the Takamars, this is a Takamar. It's beautifully made, possibly the nicest made lenses, whoops, that I've ever handled. Easily the equal of Leica fit and finish. Very nice lenses and very nice optics also. That's the the Pentax version, but every manufacturer made a kit lens like that. So we've got the Minolta 50mm f2, which is really, really nice. There's the Canon FD 50mm f1.8, which is a lovely lens. There's a Nikon version. The Olympus 50mm f1.8 is pretty cheap still and gives very, very sharp results. It has slightly harsh background blur here and there, but it does soften up and you can play around with distances until you get that right. And all of these lenses make very, very nice images. They'll all give you plenty of background blur. They'll all shoot down to a distance of around about 45 or 50 centimeters. What's this one? Yeah, this one goes down to 45 centimeters. Some will go a little closer, but you can get plenty of blur out of them because they've got a nice wide aperture, and they'll also shoot pretty close as well. And they're great lenses for general photography, street photography. You can even make a nice portrait with them too. So there are lots of alternatives, there are lots of possibilities. If you want a cheap vintage lens, those are the areas to look at. Tessars, the former Soviet lenses, third-party lenses, and manufacturers' kit lenses, which are usually 50mm f2 or f1.8 lenses. And you can make just as nice an image with a very cheap lens as you can with a very expensive lens. Always remember, it's the photographer that makes the shot, not the equipment. And any of these lenses that we've looked at today will make an image that you can be proud of, and no one is ever going to come along and say, you made that with a cheap Tessar, or you made that with a cheap kit lens. It's just not going to happen. No one's ever going to bother about that. And if they do, well, they probably should get out a bit more. You can make a fantastic, prize-winning, beautiful, really, really nice image with any of these vintage lenses. So I recommend that you try a few. And if you don't like them, remember that the vintage lens market is very strong at the moment. You can always sell them on, and depending on how much you've paid, you might even make a profit on the whole deal as well. So there we are, some really nice vintage lenses for not a lot of money. You should be able to find all of these lenses for under £40 if you're patient. And if you're really patient, you'll find many of them for a lot less than that. They do regularly go for pretty cheap prices. So there we are. That's probably about it for this week. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you found it interesting and useful. Thank you to everybody who has tuned in. Thank you to subscribers for your support, and thank you to patrons for your support. Thanks to anyone who's tuned in and watched, given thanks, super thanks, made comments, or anything else, engaged with the channel in any other way. Many, many thanks to everybody. As for me, that's about it for now. So if you're not doing anything too irksome, irritating, or bothersome next week at around this time, please do tune in for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.